Welcome to this celebration of life for Henry Julius Kokosenski Sr., or better known as Coco, Dad, or Grandpa. I'm Leonard Van Ryan, Coco's son-in-law, and married to his gorgeous daughter, Sarah. And but even being more than being just a son-in-law, I consider Coco as one of my best friends, as I think a lot of you do also. It's my privilege to officiate today for our service to celebrate his life. Let me begin by reading a few words from St. Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind, who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep. Let us pray. Lord, thank you for our dear friend and family member who you have allowed 82 years on this earth to bless and encourage so many. He served his fellow man, served his country, cared for his wife for nearly 60 years, and raised 7 amazing children, all who have gone on to change the world for the better. Such is his legacy. Now that he has left us, we grieve and adjust to a new normal without him. Please bless this time together as we honor him and support each other in our loss. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. I want to just thank you all for joining us today. Some of you have traveled great distances to be here. Thinking of what I consider Coco's favorite niece and grandniece, Christine and Catherine, all came all the way from New York. I think they had to jump on a variety of planes to get here. I'm not sure if they made it. And also grandson Christopher came from New York. Grandson Michael from the Bay Area. Grandson Jason from Las Vegas. And also from Las Vegas, Emily and Nathan, grandchildren, and their spouses. And also my wife Sarah's best friend, Starlene, came down from Sacramento to be with Sarah. And of course, Coco's oldest son, Dave, is living in Northern California, and him and his family are here also. We just thank you for all those efforts to be together at this time. The family appreciates the tremendous outpouring of love from all of you and many others who could not join us today. Just to share a little bit, I actually met Coco when I was 5 or 6 years old. He was one of my dad's best friends and golfing buddies, and he actually introduced my dad to golf, and I'm pretty sure they are up there playing right now. I know that when we said goodbye to Coco, Sheila reminded him, he says, hey, it won't be long and you'll be up to see Ari, and I'm sure they're checking out all the courses up there. And then, as getting back to my story, as siblings, we used to idolize Coco as he taught us to wrestle. He told us all these stories. Not sure all of them were quite true. And he was just so much fun to be around. But the greatest blessing actually came later when I met and married his amazing daughter, Sarah. And now after 38 years of marriage, I still feel like the luckiest guy in the world. Sarah and I are blessed with our favorite son, Jason, favorite daughter, Kristen, favorite son-in-law, Brian, and of course our favorite grandboys, Hudson and Grayson. So I've been very blessed, and a lot of it came, in reference to Coco, I think. Coco has quite an impact on everybody he meets. I think all of you would attest to that. And so we'll be hearing from a number of family and friends today sharing their thoughts. And I think that'll be kind of the focus of the service is how did Coco impact you? And if towards the end, after we get through some of these more formalities, we hope to get a mic out there. If you'd like to share a few words, feel free to do that. And then finally, I wanted to remind you that, you probably read it in the program, but we have a place set up, a room set up at Marie Callender's in Corona, and everyone is invited to join us there for a little food and fellowship. So, without any other announcements, I'd like to get in we're going to do a reading of the 23rd Psalm, and we're going to ask grandchildren, Ayrton, Caitlin, Christopher, Michael, Kristen, and Jason to come up and do that. They got in the right order. All right, you guys can just pass the mic to each other.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters.
He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me.
You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over.
Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
All right, great job. Thank you, guys. Now we're going to move on to, we're calling the eulogy section here, and we're going to start out with my wife Sarah, and then we'll have Terry, my sister-in-law Sarah's sister, and Dan share in that order. So they're going to come up here and do that. So.
Wow, what a week. My dad would be soaking up all this attention and loving this. Amazing. Allow me to introduce myself. Like I said, most of you didn't recognize me. I'm Coco and Sheila's eldest daughter. You didn't recognize me with my buck teeth and short hair. The next few minutes, we're going to just kind of camp out and unpack my dad's legacy. In 1850, my grandparents, Mary and Julius Kokosenski, purchased a farm, a real working farm, with cows and chickens and horses and pigs and rabbits. A place where you could grow your own food and can your own food. The farm overlooked the majestic Mohawk Valley on Windfall Road in Schuyler, New York. If you ever get to upstate New York, it's a road and it overlooks. It's just incredibly beautiful. My niece lives there, so she knows. My dad was born at home before home birth was in. He was almost a whopping 9 pounds. He had a beautiful, strong set of teeth and hair. Just kidding, that's what my grandma said. He was 9 pounds and he was born with teeth. He was born number 8 in a family of 9 kids, snap dab in the middle of the Great Depression. My dad would often joke that they were so poor that they had to eat the putty off the windows. In reality, there was no indoor plumbing and only a wood stove to heat the big house. My dad later plumbed and put in an indoor plumbing for my grandma. Okay, at 9 years old, let's kind of take a deep breath right now and remember where we were at 9 years of age. 4th grade, division, maybe California history. My dad, in the 4th grade, had a difficult defining moment. When he came home, he found his father dead in the house from the complications of sugar diabetes. In the 1940s, insulin was still in its infancy. My dad said the way he lived, that life from that day on was forever changed. Interestingly enough, my grandma Mary never remarried. She ran the farm and raised 9 children alone with no assistance. Now you know where my dad gets the lecture about people on welfare. My sisters, Terry and I, are forever grateful to share such a strong feminine power DNA. After the loss of his father, my dad had a very challenging time coping. The highlight of his week was riding the wagon, driving the horses into downtown Utica to church. He felt the peace with the organ music and the stained glass. His favorite sister, Frances, would sit by him in church and hug him. However, when the offering plate was passed, he wanted to reach in and take the money out of the plate instead of putting the money in. My dad said many men were out of work, and my grandma would hire the hobos or the homeless people to work in the fields, help milk the cows, clean the barn, and the chicken coop. They'd spend the night, get a farmer's breakfast, and be on the way in the morning. I believe in my heart that's where my dad's ability to talk to anyone about anything at any time was formed. He never met a stranger. My dad said when people came over from the church, my grandma would roll out the red carpet and give them the best vegetables, the best cuts of meat, the chicken, and the pork. He learned from an early age to give away the best, and the family often went without. Even today, my mom and dad, if you go into their house, it can be a total disaster, laundry on the floor, dishes in the sink not done, but they would sit down and give you their hearts. That was the lesson that my dad learned, to give generously and hold your possessions lightly. My dad attended a one-room schoolhouse from kindergarten to 8th grade. Above the farm, a half mile up the road, he would have to walk in the snow to get to school. So not barefoot, but he did have to do that. The first Christmas after the devastating loss of my dad's father, the neighboring farm, Johnny Ike's family, was the first family in the area to get a television, black and white with rabbit ears. So they were these antennas that you put on top of your TV that you would have to move to find the station. On a 12-inch screen, my dad sat memorized as he watched live from Pasadena, California, the Rose Parade. As the temperatures in New York that day were 10 below zero with the wind chill factor and blizzard conditions with snow drifts up to the top of the barn, he made a pact, a goal, a prayer, a dream, to someday move to California and start a business. My dad attended White Squirrel Central High School, where he excelled in football, wrestling, boxing, and he won blue ribbons in the feature farmer for his cows and pigs. Sports were his passion, and he came very close, in fact, placing 9th to qualify for the Olympic wrestling team. Ever notice my dad's hands, especially if you shook his right hand? It almost looked like a claw, like this. He would tell us that the Indians shot him. And I think I believed that until high school, because you never questioned him. Seriously though, my Aunt Frances spilled the beans and told the truth that my dad had ditched school that day to go quail and deer hunting. Johnny Ike's, the same neighbor that was the first farm in the area to have a television, just happened to be plowing his field a half mile away. He heard my dad's shotgun go off, and my dad was holding the shotgun, and he jumped down, and it blew his hand off. Johnny Ike's took my dad on the tractor, bleeding to death and gunpowder toxic, into the hospital. He was there for 6 weeks. He had a high fever, and they didn't think that he was going to live. So all you non-medical personnel, today we use donor tissue, but back then you had to cut a hole, and his hand had to be put into his stomach for the skin to grow. So that, I believe, what gave my dad his lifelong hatred and phobia of hospitals. My dad worked part-time in high school to help my grandma with the farm budget. He was a cook at the White Tower restaurant. The White Tower is kind of similar to Marie Callender's where we're having lunch today. There was no fast food back then. I still remember standing on the chair next to the stove on the house on Pike Drive, and my dad showing me how to make the perfect fried egg. Although my mom could make a mean tuna noodle casserole, my dad could rival any top chef on TV. His Sunday night dinners with Bible study and his homemade spaghetti sauce was delicious. Michelin 5-star. The Korean War hit when my dad was in high school, and there was no question in every brave man's heart you'd serve your country, just like my dad's older brothers, Stephen, John, Anthony. My dad signed up with pride to serve the country he loved so much. My dad was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, at the airfield. His best buddy, Al Graber, had a nursing student in college named Ellen. My dad asked, "Hey, Al, does Ellen have any nurses that she could fix me up with?" My mom and dad started writing letters back to each other on the onion skin paper, that old thin paper that you would fold together. So my mom, and her sense of humor, wrote to my dad in her first letter, and she said, "Coco, I'm 300 pounds, and I have warts all over my nose." My dad said he fell in love with her humor, and the first time he saw her, I know Mama kept looking. And the first time he saw her, he said he fell head over heels in love with her. As Dad put it was love at first bite. My mom still has those letters that my dad wrote to her, and it's in her hope chest, and she only let us read a few of them. They're tied in bundles. Side note, I think you're wearing them, Mom. My mom is wearing the beautiful pearls that my dad bought for her in Okinawa, Japan, almost 60 years ago. My dad was very much a romantic at heart, always writing love letters. Actually, the cards were always better than the gifts. He loved holidays, Christmas, Valentine's Day, Easter. He was just always a one to celebrate. My dad's prayers were answered, and he was transferred to El Toro Marine Base Airfield in Orange, California. He got engaged to my mom on February 14th, and they had a big church wedding complete with military swords and a princess lace puffy gown on June 14th, my mom even in a tiara. I actually wore that same wedding dress to my wedding like 30 years later. They honeymooned in Niagara Falls. They drove Route 66, where they got their kicks on Route 66. My dad would always sing that. So pulling into Las Vegas, Nevada in the black of night with the brightest blinking lights my mom ever did see. They stayed at the Golden Nugget for $2.99 a night and had steak and eggs for breakfast for $1. They were treated like kings and queens. My dad's lifelong dream of moving to California came to fruition. My mom did cry that first Christmas when there was no snow on Carfax Avenue, and my dad never looked back. My dad's time in the Marine Corps was coming to a close, and he actually worked 2 jobs. He started working for Bill Layton of Layton Soft Water in Orange County, California, and the Marines. My mom worked at St. Joseph's Hospital as a labor and delivery room nurse right across the street from where South Coast Plaza is today. My mom was 23 years old and never drove a car. She grew up in the city in a 3-story walk-up. They could ride the bus for a nickel, so why would your family ever have a car? My dad said it was easier to teach someone to fly an airplane than to teach my mom how to drive. They purchased an apartment building that they soon sold for not a big profit, as the building was located in the middle of the Orange Grove, where they were tearing down the Orange Grove to put in the new Interstate 5 freeway at Red Hill Avenue Freeway Round. The first house, they lived on Carfax Avenue for 5 years and saved every dime. In 1965, my dad started Kokosenski Water and Plumbing. The first building was on East Grand, and the second building was kitty corner from the Corona Library. So as we're standing right here, it's probably a mile down the road. My mom and dad worked 90-hour weeks. My mom worked doing my dad's bookkeeping and worked the 3 to 11 shift at Circle City Hospital in labor and delivery again. And one of the nurses who I went to college with, her daughter, she said, "Your mom was always pregnant." You also worked for Dr. Nelson. As at young ages, my siblings and I were separating plumbing fittings, cleaning bathrooms, sweeping floors, answering telephones, dealing with customers, taking orders. Remember, there was no Home Depot or Lowe's back then. I remember my dad always saying, "You kids are more like liabilities, you're not assets." We were never, ever paid an allowance, and I'm sure by today's standards, especially with all the helicopter parents, they were violating labor and child abuse laws. My dad would always remind us at night, "It's a privilege you have a roof over your head, running water and a hot meal. Quit your belly aching." One day, I noticed this dark-haired boy sweeping my dad's shop. I was thinking in my 10-year-old proud and very immature brain, I could do a better job than he is. He's missing some spots. Why can't he use the broom right? Then the unthinkable happened. My dad pulls out his wallet and gives this boy $5. I was thinking, what? We were never allowed to talk back to our parents. I said that in my mind. Then I asked my dad, "Dad, that's not fair. Why are you paying him and not me?" Sarah, the boy's name was Michael. Michael doesn't have a dad at home or a mom that loves him. And most of the time, this is something you need to learn. Life isn't fair. Besides, see that graffiti on the shop across the street? That was my dad. He'd say a little word of wisdom, and then he'd follow it up with humor. So I'm looking at the graffiti across the way, and it wasn't the graffiti of the master taggers today. It was like, "El Jesus con la licha equals true love always." So my dad said, "Besides, Sarah, if I take care of the kids in the neighborhood, our shop will never have that graffiti." And you know, it never did. I read in the Economist magazine that 90% of new businesses go bankrupt after 3 years. My parents ran Kokosenski Water and Plumbing for 28 years. My dad had adult ADD. He could never sit still in retirement unless the World Series or the Super Bowl was on. For some reason, he could be focused then. He drove for Leonard for 2 years, and then he started 7A trucking that he ran for 30 years until he had a stroke 7 years ago. My dad was like a superhero without a cape. You know superheroes in the Marvel comics that fly in, they rescue, they get all the glory, they save the day? My dad was more like a superhero that secretly and incredibly did things quietly. And how do I know that? I was in Kmart shopping one day. I'm a Walmart shopper now. But back then in Kmart, I heard this Irish lady with her nun habit come up, and she said, "Sarah Kokosenski?" And I'm like, "No, what is that name?" No, Ben Ryan. But anyway, she was my 5th grade teacher, nun, at St. Edward's School. And I said, "Sister Danielle," I bought her a blue iced tea, and I got an iced tea, and we sat in the Kmart cafe. And she grabbed my hand, and I said, why is it when you were teaching us a lesson, and my mom and dad would walk in the classroom, you would drop everything? It was like Jesus and Mary walked in the room. And then I actually wrote down in my journal that day on a piece of paper and then added into my journal, because I never in my life knew that my mom and dad did this. Sarah, let me tell you that there's widows that your dad sends money to every month. They're alone and they don't have a husband. He replumbed the convent, costing us would have been $35,000 to $40,000, and he did it for free. Any new family at church, especially the single moms, they would get new water heaters for no money. He planned the New Year's Eve ball for the bishop. My dad would play and pay for the priest to golf. He headed up the Harvest Halloween Carnival, the biggest fundraiser that St. Edward's ever had. My dad was always a kid at heart. He taught most kids, special needs kids, how to bowl, and he paid for kids at Peppermint Ridge to have time to go home to families that couldn't come see them. My mom would help children and adults who committed suicide or attempted to commit suicide, helping them with counseling,
my dad would be with the families just to listen to them. Your mom was our school nurse that never charged anything to do the immunizations or the eye exams. Your dad helped with Toys for Tots. At Christmas time, there was always a check at church for kids that families couldn't afford the toys. He coached baseball, I still don't know sports. He coached baseball, little league, boxing, and wrestling. And he taught juvenile delinquents how to box and how to defend themselves. Although they didn't have guns back then, they had knives. They were marriage counselors with people that were struggling in their marriages. They would invite people over to our house when my dad would play bridge or bingo or cards or poker, and that other family would get connected to other families. And then she said something that just blew me away. Remember Michael that I talked about, the little boy I was envious of that swept the shop, and my dad paid $5. Sister Daniel Helene told me that he avoided going into a gang and was able to fight off the gang members because of what your dad taught him. He is now a pediatrician, giving back to the community because your dad was such a father figure to him. I never knew this about my dad or my mom. So that's what I mean, that my dad was a superhero, and he was all about giving without getting the glory. He was extremely hard on us, but all of us could stand up here and tell us when we were ever in a crisis situation, my dad was the first one there with a listening ear and a hug. In closing, before I let my brilliant, beautiful sister, Dr. Terry, take over, I want to take a moment to be very vulnerable with you. Although my dad was a superhero without a cape, he had some devil horns that would flare up once in a while. My mom would always say he's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. For all of you who know him at a deeper level, you know he was borderline racist and really not afraid to show it. He was stubborn, opinionated. He's similar to Donald Trump on steroids. Our home was tainted with alcohol, and my strong and courageous mom told him flat out, it's either me and the kids or you and the bottle, and you make that decision. He chose wisely most of the time. He taught us to never check our brains in at the door, challenge authority, especially when we thought things weren't right. From Good Friday until Easter Sunday, it was such a sacred time watching my dad pass into Jesus' arms. Truly a holy moment on holy ground. He was surrounded by all his children that he loved, and his great-grandchildren and his grandchildren whom he loved even more. Jody was our critical care nurse and trauma room nurse, and she caught me in the hallway, and she said, Sarah, I've been out this for 15 years, and let me tell you, when your family sang that hymn, I never in my 15 years saw a more loving, respectful, caring family. That's so neat to know. You can really tell you're Christians by your actions and by your love. Yes, what a week we've had. But thanks, Dad. We are forever grateful for your modeling to us how life is done, not perfectly, but secretly with love. I'm sure Jesus probably said, well done and good, thy faithful servant, and thanks, Dad, for finishing well. We all love you.
Wow, how do you follow that, right? When you're number 5 of 7, you're used to following that. So, it was either your Dave's younger sister, and that was a good thing, or if you were Susan's younger sister, it was a good thing, but she didn't like math. So, and of course, if you're Sarah's younger sister, it was a hard thing to follow. But anyway, good afternoon. I get the honor of sharing a few stories about my dad, but I want to start with some of his characteristics. As my sister said, our dad was politically incorrect before it was a, incorrect thing to say. He had no filter. When you walked in the house, you were sure to receive feedback on what you were wearing, or how your hair looked, and I'll save the rest for another time. He was at times overwhelming, huh, Mom? but overwhelming in a good way. My siblings and I thought when we were growing up, my parents had 7 kids just to field the baseball team or to work in the shop. However, how straightforward and insufferable our dad could be, he was our dad. He expressed his love for his family by being that overwhelming parent who offered his unsolicited advice quite often. He had an uncanny sixth sense and could often predict outcomes. So probably about 15 years ago, I got rid of my Isuzu Trooper. I left my car. And I was at my parents' and I was talking about cars. And I said, I love the Dodge Durango. My dad said, Terry, you buy a Dodge, at 36,000 miles, that car will break down. You buy a Honda or a Toyota. I was like, no, Dad, it's really cute. Honestly, Mark, at 35,000 miles, the alternator, starter, air conditioner went out. Called my dad, he said, go to the Honda dealer. We bought our Pilot and it lasted 13 years. He expressed his love for his family by being that overwhelming parent who offered his unsolicited advice quite often, as I said. He would either liked your friends or significant other quite quickly, and you knew it. When I first started dating my husband Mark in 1985, my dad was starting his business. He may have been working with you, Leonard, or he just started. So when Mark would come over from Anaheim to Corona to pick me up for a date, I always said, Mom, when's Dad coming back in town? And she would say, not till Saturday. So I said, Mark, Friday night's great. So we dated probably 4 months before my dad met my husband. And, I think I always knew deep down that Mark and my dad would click so well that I would probably lose Mark to my dad, So actually, yes. So my husband and my dad golfed, they talked, they laughed, they had some wonderful times together. Although our dad was direct and intolerable at times, sometimes he was extremely compassionate, loving, nurturing, and the hardest working individual I've ever met. We never were able to go on extravagant vacations, but get ready, be jealous for this. Our family would load into whatever vehicle held 9 people, and we would go across the country. At first, I was upset because my friends were either going to Hawaii or Palm Springs or what have you, and we would be going the southern route and coming home the northern route. However, that meant that we saw the amazing sights of the United States. I remember one morning, it was probably 3 in the morning, and we parked, I think it was our Corvair van, outside of the Arch of St. Louis, and it was like, okay, get up. And we all, 9 of us fell out of the van, and there it was. He said, get in, let's go. We've got it. That was my dad. We were so lucky. We saw Grand Canyon and Niagara Falls. We were extremely lucky to see the launch of the Apollo 15, which was really great. We visited museums, sporting museums, libraries. Our relatives in New York were so excited when they knew we were coming in the summer because we would just ascend on them and wreak havoc at their houses. But our most memorable trip to New York was when our beloved dog Rover. Now, if you don't know, my dad was an animal lover. That's the gene I got. She came with us, and she was a stray that my dad brought home. She was probably about 20 pounds small, black furry thing, always slept under my bed. Well, halfway in the middle of the country, Rover gave birth to 9 puppies. 8, 9. It was a pretty incredible trip. However, that wasn't our most memorable. Our most memorable was when I was 5 years old. Come up here, Sue. My mom was driving our Corvair van across the country, and we we stopped in Odessa, Nebraska, okay, on this, gas station. It was probably 6 in the morning. My dad was sleeping, my mom, little tiny mom, was driving the van, and what she would do is she would count. She would say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we're all in, let's go. So,
Well, I'll tell the real story was I had to do nothing. But I could stay in the van, I was cooped up, I had to get out. So my mom goes, you are not getting out, you just say you have to go to the restroom. So my sister got out, went to the restroom, and we got in the car and we forgot her. So we're driving down the freeway.
So we're driving down the freeway, and my mom's favorite term, pardon me, I'm gonna say a cuss word right here. Look at this guy behind me, he's driving like a bat out of hell, pardon me. And this man comes zooming up in this beautiful Lincoln Town car, and this young little girl is inside waving. And my mom and I are like, this is pre-seatbelt, so Susan's sitting next to my mom. I'm behind my mom, standing, wrapped my arms around her, you know, standing in. My sister Susan goes, hi mom, that looks like a pulls in front of us, and lo and behold, it was our sister. She got out of the car, gets in the car, and my mom said, do not let your father go. We slept through the entire thing. We're like, love you, mom. Every time we tell this story, it was so heartwarming because my sister didn't remember my sister had a red hoodie with white stripes. So it was just something that was really memorable that, well, not that, I mean, we found it. But I think my dad, at that point, we were all thankful it was my mom driving because I think that just would have, my mom was always really calm in any situation, and, you know, and then would break down a little bit later. But my dad just was so overwhelming with us. I mean, really protective. Even now, if we went over to the house, he would say, drive safe and call us when you get home. I mean, it's just something that he did. But anyway, I want us to stay there. Our dad loved animals. These two do not. I do.
I like some animals, I like Missy.
They're too dirty. I like clean.
And I love animals. I got that from my dad. He would bring stray animals home. Honestly, one day he brought a cow. You guys remember that? It was a cow. As kids, we felt sometimes that our dad cared more about the animals. But that was okay. He loved his community of down roots in Corona. As a matter of fact, his barber of 31 years is here. And Susan, David, and I, and my mom, when we were making arrangements on Monday, we stopped at his significant spots as we were taking my mom home. And it was really great to hear all the wonderful things that he said about Dad home.
It was actually a little annoying, to be honest, because he would not go anywhere else. Dad, Fantastic Sam's is right here, let's just go right here.
Yeah, he loved his barber. He loved his country and never missed watching the Olympics. He loves sports. I'm a huge sports fan.
Hate sports.
And a lot of times when I would go to my parents, I would sit. He was an Angels fan. I'm a Dodgers fan. He loved golf. You know, he watched the Dodgers. He loved golf. He loved his sons. He would be at a lot of their sporting events. And my brother Bobby, I was so thankful because he and I were a year apart at school. I played softball, he played baseball. And my mom and dad would say, Terry, would you mind if we go watch Bobby's game? I was like, no, not at all. Go ahead. I'd hear my dad coaching from the sidelines across the field. My dad loved to work. He did not work to live, he lived to work. He did. He was proud of his businesses and the friendships he made because of those businesses. He instilled in all of us a work ethic, a little crazy, to the extreme. My siblings and I often joke about how many days off we take. We don't call in sick, we don't take days off. He loved to work. So he would be so happy right now that none of us had to take any time off from work. His service is this Saturday. Would you agree, all of you? Yes, come on, yeah. Our dad loved his grandchildren and his 4 great-grandkids. He loved us kids. I remember when I had my son Christopher, called me in the hospital and he said, Terry, you know, I just can't come visit you in the hospital, but I'm so excited you had a boy. When I had my daughter Caitlin, same thing. He called and he said, there's nothing like a daughter. There isn't. He loved our mom. We sometimes wonder. We know. But when you have been with someone for over 60 years, you learn to take the good, the bad, and, he loved you, Mom. He did. We often used to say, please, God, let, my mom go before my dad. My dad go before my mom, because Mom, we don't know, he would not have survived. He wouldn't. He wouldn't have wanted to. Our dad was our dad. He had a kind heart and a love for his family that we're so lucky that we have. And we want to thank everyone for coming in.
You're up, Dan.
I'm Daniel, the youngest. Some of you know me by a different name.
Is this on?
I promise to be a little shorter. I've often thought the success of a person can be measured by how many people attend this funeral. So if we just had a few more, I think my dad would be considered successful. I was never in the military, but I think my dad ran our family as a drill instructor. If anyone is wondering how we could roll out of bed, get showered, eat, and be on the road in under 11 minutes, you now have some insight. He would always provide opportunities to fail, which actually taught us to succeed. No doubt, many of us in this room failed delivering heavy salt bags. He was always tough on us, and I'm better off for it. He always pushed us to be our best. He would never let on how proud he was. Perhaps he feared us make us soft when we would quit trying. One day at a scale house in Phoenix, Arizona, I was picking up a load. And the lady goes, "Oh, you're Coco's son. He's so proud of you. And all your brothers." And I'm sure he was proud of the girls too. I'm shaking my head going, this lady's in Phoenix, Arizona. And my dad was there like a week prior. But this lady knows he's all proud of us. So it's just kind of funny. I guess most of you always knew how he felt. It never occurred to me that if I wanted to know how proud he was, I could have asked anyone in this room except one. As many of you know, another thing what my dad loved to do was talk. It was wise not to answer the phone unless you had a good 45 minutes to chat. And you got bonus points if you were in a position to buy him something. Old Spice, thick socks, and other readers were one of his favorite gifts. When technology allowed us to sign ringtones to contacts, I gave my dad the alarm tone. When the sound went off, good or bad, I never knew what to expect. One thing my dad was not good at was saying goodbye, especially on the phone. You would get to the end of the conversation, it would be time for goodbyes, and he would strike up another conversation, and another, and another. You just didn't want to say goodbye. Unfortunately, then, the time has come to go. Love you.
All right, I'm gonna try to get through this. I'm Dave Kokosenski, Henry's oldest son. My dad, Henry Julius Kokosenski. Those called him Henry, Hank, and everyone knew him as Coco. Some of you knew my dad as a jet mechanic in the Marines. My dad loved that. He was a jet mechanic. He worked on some of the fastest things on the planet. So what I'm going to share is some of the memories that I had with my dad that involved fast things. Okay, I remember getting up early to get in line at Riverside Raceway so that we could get a good spot in turn 6 where all of us could sit along the fence and watch Richard Petty and Bobby Allison and all the others race around one of the tracks near our home. My dad loved the fact that he took all of us and we had so much fun there. My dad also loved watching the little mini air shows that they would do at these events. The acrobatic planes,
the different moves that they would make, including the lumps of rock. That was his favorite move. So, I also remember those hot summer days at Corona Raceway, watching Don Stanley race his blue 57 Chevy. My dad loved that guy. My dad sponsored his car, and we had a blast. I remember my sisters running around in the front row, doing different things and cheering for different drivers. We had a blast. I also remember my dad's friend, Ed Bunch. Ed Bunch had one of the fastest 66 Corvettes on the planet at the time. My dad sponsored his car. We spent time at Orange County International Raceway. And I remember, at that time, I don't think the attorneys were involved. Because I could go there and pour the bleach as a young boy in front of the tires and just watch them do a burnout and go down the track. I loved that. Later, my dad would take us to the Ontario Motor Speedway, if you remember those days. There was a time period where that track was open for 10 years. And later, he bought season tickets at the Fontana Raceway, and I remember taking my sons there with my dad, and we enjoyed those times. This was touched on a little bit earlier, but I'll elaborate. In July of 1971, while we were driving back to New York, my mom was driving and I was riding shotgun. We were in front of the seat, and I was reading the newspaper, and Apollo 15 was going to blast off in about 2.5 days. So I said, Mom, I said, what do you think? Can we go? And my mom says, well, we got to talk to your dad. My dad had drove all night and he was asleep in the car in the back. So my mom said, well, my Aunt May lives in Florida. So now we had 2 reasons to go to Florida. So my dad woke up, and he was in a good mood. After driving all night. And I said, Dad, Mom and I were talking, and I said, we'd like to go to Florida. I would like to go see Apollo 15 blast off. My dad knew how much I loved the space program, as I built all the models through the Mercury and Apollo missions. My mom chimed in and says, I'd like to go see Aunt May. We went and saw my aunt, and we went and saw Apollo 15 blast off. It was one of the coolest things I've ever experienced in my entire life. I remember this moment in the summer of 1975. I was helping my dad work on a house adjacent to the Riverside Raceway. We heard an Indy car practicing out on the track. And I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I said, do you hear that? And he says, yes. He goes, when we get this job done, maybe we can go over there and see who that is. So at that time, the gate was open, and you could go right up to the pits and watch whoever was practicing. So we went up there, we got behind the pits, and the mechanics were there, they were waiting for the car to come in. Car comes in, we had no idea who it was. It was Mario Andretti. At that time, I got to talk to Mario Andretti and talk to his mechanics. And when Mario got back into the car, he asked me, he says, what would you like me to do? And I says, can you burn them off as you leave the pits? And he said, absolutely. And I had never seen an Indy car do a burnout like that in my life. Turn the page. In 2004, let me back up, in 1995, I worked at a plumbing company here in Southern California, and I had the opportunity to go to Indianapolis 500. It was an experience I'll never forget until 2004. Our office manager, Debbie, her family had season tickets at the Indianapolis 500 for 40 years. She said, my mom is in Fort Hill, and I know how much you love Indianapolis. we have 4 tickets, would you like to buy them? And I said, absolutely. So we were gonna fly back, my dad and my 2 oldest sons. And at the last minute, my dad said, let's drive. So we hopped in the van, and we drove 31 hours straight. But I got to watch the 2004 Indianapolis 500 with my dad and my 2 oldest sons. That's a treat that I will remember my entire life. The company that I worked for, they had a suite at Fontana Raceway. Debbie was our office manager. Debbie always hired a host to bring some of the drivers in to talk to us. She was trying to get Richard Petty to come in. My dad loved Richard Petty. Here was my opportunity to meet him, someone that my dad loved, and talk to him face to face. Unfortunately, the host came in and said Kyle Petty's car was having trouble and Richard couldn't come. So later, she comes back and she says, I got the next best thing. She says, I have Bobby Allison. He'll be here in a few minutes. So Bobby Allison shows up and he's talking to all of us. It's about 2 in the afternoon and he hadn't had dinner yet for lunch. He goes, I'm starved. No one ever asked me to eat with them. So Debbie and I had lunch with Bobby Allison, and I had the opportunity to tell him about all the trips that we took to Riverside and watch him race in turn 6, and how my dad took our entire family there. He thought that was so special. I had the opportunity to meet Richard Petty. I had a trade show about a year and a half ago in Oakland. I was unloading my vehicle, and I looked over and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was Richard Petty. That weekend there was a race in Sonoma, and Richard told me that he was having dinner with his friend, and they were going to go out sailing afterwards. So I got to spend time with Richard Petty and tell him about my dad taking us to Riverside and enjoying those races in turn 6. And he said, what a treat. For you and your whole family, your brothers and sisters, to be there and watch these races was special to him. It told him what my dad meant to me, and he truly appreciated it. I'm going to shift gears. My mom and I, we were going through some of the things, and we ran across the letters that my sisters touched on earlier. The love letters that they wrote back and forth while my dad was in the service. I kind of did the quick math on how high those letters would be. If you stacked the love letters, it would be about this high. I thought about that for a minute. I thought about emails and texts and all of that. And I thought about all the stamps that my mom and dad would have to buy to send those back and forth. And it showed their commitment to each other. So sorry, I had to throw that in. Coco loved fast things. He loved his children, he loved his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And most of all, my mom. I will cherish the memories, and I want to thank my dad for showing me the way.
We have Henry Hank next. So, thank you, Sheriff.
I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm Henry Julius Kokosenski, Jr. I just want to make sure everybody knows how much you meant and how proud you feel that all you are here today, how much you loved all of us. You really did. Grandkids, children, everybody, my mom. You know, I don't want to throw in any funny stories or anything. You guys have heard them all. But come to your Greek calendars, you know, come join us. We'll kind of let our hair down a little bit. And Old Spice in the back. Don't touch it.
grandsons, Jason, which was my son, and they had a really special relationship.
I think this is the longest funeral I've ever been to. Definitely, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for showing all my family support during this time. And again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Henry Van Ryan. I was named after my grandfather. I remember Christmas time at 301 Pike Drive, a bedroom full of gifts. Some of them may have been from the Price Club. Grandma and Grandma's house was usually full of licorice, Reese's peanut butter cups, sodas, Nintendo, cable television. I was very spoiled. I remember 4th of July's at the family dairy, which is now East Bell. Grandpa would buy tons of illegal fireworks. And one year I remember the garage almost started on fire. I remember trips in the truck, just Grandpa and I. I remember one trip up to Idaho, and we stopped at a small little town in the middle of Nevada. And he knew the hostess, and he knew the waitress, he knew everybody that worked there. And we sat, and I remember he said I could order whatever I want. And I had French toast and a cinnamon roll, which I don't think he was very happy about my choice, but he let me order it. And while he sipped his cups of black coffee, I learned about a new game called Keno. It was a good learning experience, being about 9 years old, learning all the math with a 4-spot, a 5-spot, and a 6-spot. I remember playing golf in Bakersfield on Thanksgiving Day. Just the boys. It might have been a 6 or 7 some. I don't know how we were allowed to go on the golf course like that, but the ladies stayed home and cooked. Going to my first NASCAR race, just Grandpa and I, receiving a box of baseball cards just about every time he came by. Grandpa could always make me laugh. He had a great energy about him. I'm probably going to kind of reiterate this closing because I guess it's kind of true. But my grandpa liked to talk to everybody. I remember being almost embarrassed sometimes as a kid because he would literally just talk to everybody about everything. He liked everyone unless you didn't have a job. So in closing, many memories I'll have of my grandpa and I that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. Thank you.
All right, and we have another grandson, Christopher, I think wanted to share. Terry and Mark's oldest.
Alright, I'll try and keep this short too. I can't promise anything though. Too many memories. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris, Coco's grandson, son of his daughter Teresa. When I heard that my grandfather peacefully passed above early Easter morning, I knew that I would want to be here traveling from New York to speak about him, and most importantly, celebrate his life. I lost an unforgettable grandpa and a true personal hero of mine. And I think, although his 82-year life song has ended, I believe we can celebrate his energetic melody as it will continue to linger on for eternity with all of us. And as his children's eulogies so far have reflected, we should focus on not the sheer number of years that he lived, but the amount of life that he was able to infuse into all of those 82 years. Grandpa filled these years with his loving character, his energy, his work ethic, which greatly influenced me, and his selfless, humorful spirit. I feel like I have an infinite amount of memories with him. One photo when I was a baby that's been stuck in my head over the last week shows him near my stroller as we're checking out farm animals. As stated, he loved animals. Found out that he was explaining to me what the animal was, its utility on the farm, and the ways in which we rely on animals and nature for food and economic growth at such a young age. Growing up, I remember asking my parents if I could come to Coco's to help him with chores. He had a way with words in which he made mundane tasks like lawn mowing pretty interesting by explaining the science behind the season's effects on grass and teaching me how to fertilize. So Grandpa was the first man to interest me in the environment, which encouraged me to undertake my current academic and professional endeavors. So I'm going to share some memories that I have with all 18, I think, of his grandchildren. So this is when I was in adolescence. I remember when all the grandchildren jammed together in a van to help Grandma and Grandpa Coco move to Pinecrest. We were all excited that we'd be able to come there. They had a pool now, we could swim, and most importantly, we could see our grandparents. Annually, I look forward to holidays as opportunities to learn from this well-traveled and wise man, as well as accrue some of his famous epic one-liners and some of his world-famous humor that we can share in memory comics. Somehow, someway, he was able to make sure all grandkids were entertained. He would overfill the hot tub in the backyard with soap, which would then rise up basically to the top of the house. One of my memories, I used to get hit a lot by golf balls in his backyard. But he would challenge us to dodge these golf balls, turn it into a business, pick up as many as possible, and sell them on the roadside. Sometimes he even allowed the boys who played sports to check out his classic baseball card collection. Someone was even nice enough to give some of them to us. He would gather us to tell us incredulous stories and hilarious jokes. I know that he said his pinky got shot off by the Indians, but another one that made me forever scared of horses when I was growing up. It almost looked like a horse chomped it off. He's like, Chris, I just wanted to let you know, I was messing around with the family horse on the farm, turned around and bit it off, so I was just scared of horses for the rest of my life. Another memory I have, we were using the pool table, not really playing pool. I threw the pool ball, went through the window. Coco just laughed it off and said that we were just being grandkids, which was great too. On Christmas, the grandsons would get those famous Hot Wheels, the granddaughters would get Barbies, while all of us would get those comfy Kirkland brand socks that, quote unquote, weren't cheap, boy. We went to several Angels games where he would speak his mind, entertain those around him, and make his grandkids potentially hesitant to go again with him. Grandpa's competitive nature inspired me to strive for greatness in order to achieve my dreams. One time, I even let him come to my Little League games when I was pitching. He told all parents, regardless of whether or not their kids were on my team, that the kids were playing poorly while I was throwing a gem. During Thanksgiving, he filled the day with unique, energetic vibrancy with his antics during our trivias, requests for grandchildren to sneak my beer behind Grandma's back, and most importantly, sustained efforts to check in on our families and congratulate one on a new life accomplishment, job promotion, or any athletic achievement. So moving on to when I moved to New York City, Coco had his first stroke as I graduated high school and left for college. I felt blessed with the extra 7 years I had to spend with Coco. I felt a closer connection with him because the further I was away, the more I wanted to see him when I could, especially after learning so much about his past in New York State. During breaks, I would go to see how he was doing, update him on what was going on in New York, and learn about his patriotic story and fully lived life. For example, while looking at his yearbook, I learned who is a successful athlete at Whitesboro High School. In every signature I read, his classmates wrote about how athletically talented he was, how his humor and personality could light up a room, and how they'd keep in touch because he was truly unforgettable. He would always jest that it must be those quote-unquote hussies keeping me in New York. Asked if I'd gone to any Mets or Yankees games, and reminded me to visit him again when I was in California. So the last time I saw Grandpa, we bonded over an excessive amount of black coffee and pancakes, talked about his childhood growing up in New York State, and looked at old photographs of him, which are definitely a spitting image of his grandson, Ayrton. It was truly a great last memory to have with him because he wanted to hear about the trip that Chris Kokosenski and I had just taken to Poland, especially after receiving the postcard that we sent from Warsaw to him. He was so fixated on the photos of the old country and Polish memorabilia that he started speaking Polish to me for a pretty long time before saying, Chris, this is real nice, thank you. These photos are great. Well, of course, inserting a joke into that statement saying, those Polish women are beautiful, huh? Next time you go, Chris, let's go together. The The last memory I have is of this precious moment where he shared old stories and photos. We talked about Poland, laughed together, and planned a trip. Grandpa, with his distinct voice, trucker hat, and wide-rim glasses, was joking around. Smiling from ear to ear, his eyes were lit up with joy, his heart was filled with love, and most importantly, he was being himself, the man we all got to know and love. I said goodbye, not knowing that this would be the last time I would see him. Bye. He said he loved me, and I said I loved him back too. We embraced one last time. My family and I drove away from Pinecrest Drive, while Grandpa and Grandma, as they always did, lovingly stood on their porch, smiling and waving until we disappeared off onto the freeway. Grandpa Coco's memory and soul will live on forever because it will truly be impossible to forget how he made any of us like myself feel. Although we've lost Grandpa Coco in this life, I believe there is solace during this time of grief. It is reassuring to know once I go back to New York and I look up into the night sky, looking at the countless number of stars in the universe. One of the stars will be an opening of the heavens where Grandpa Coco's love shines down upon each and every one of us to let us know he's happy and can't wait to see us again. I love you, Grandpa, and I look forward to hanging out with you in the afterlife while we watch baseball, cook kielbasa, snack on your world famous popcorn, drink some cold ones, crack jokes, and take that trip to Poland. Rest in peace, and may God be with you always, Grandpa Coco.
All right, thank you. Wow. Just noticing that you guys are pretty good at talking too. So, just wanted to make sure I got everything here. Yeah, I think at this time we can open the mic up for a little bit here for anybody else that want to share a few thoughts. Let's see if I get this on here. If you want to come up, you can, but I can bring it to you also. So, would you like to come up?
Hello, everyone. I'm Henry J's niece from the East Coast. My mom was his oldest sister. My dad was like a surrogate father to Mike. I wrote down some thoughts. Some of it is repetitious, but I think it adds credence to who he was as a person, what the Kokosenski family was and taught him, and his Polish roots. As Sarah said, Uncle Hank grew up in the town of Schuyler, which is outside of Utica, in central New York, not near New York City. We make a big thing of that because everybody thinks New York is New York City. His parents were Polish immigrants who settled with other Polish immigrants in an area that was much like where they came from in Poland, the hills and the good farmland. His first language was Polish. They all spoke Polish at home. He and his brother Richard were the babies of the family, and they kept the farm going, as Sarah mentioned. After their dad died, they worked on it, and their brothers had left and gone to war. He learned about baseball from his brothers and the other Polish gang in the community. They were known for going to another town, which was at least 15 miles away, walking through the fields to play baseball every weekend and whenever they could. The family loved baseball, and it's carried through all of the brothers. I met my dear uncle the day I was born, and he spoiled me from that day on. One of my earliest memories was the day my dad explained why my mom wasn't home, because she was at the hospital because Uncle Hank blew his finger off. Need I say anything else? He was raised on hard work and loved the land. He did farm chores before and after school every day, listening to Elvis Presley country music, and polkas in the barn as they fed, milked the cows and cleaned the barn. He rode a school bus to Whitesboro, this lovely school that he loved to the day he died. I don't know what the alumni newsletter is going to do, Aunt Sheila, because he always wrote about all of his children and grandchildren's accomplishments. They're going to have a lot of space to fill. His bus ride to school, once he went to Whitesboro, after he left that little schoolhouse, which my parents, and actually the schoolhouse was built on land that his parents donated so that they could build the one little schoolhouse there. It was 2 hours for him to get to high school every day, one way. Not because of the traffic that you guys are used to, but because of the distance that they had to go on. I remember him winning, or seeing pictures, he was in Future Farmers of America, and he would win those calves for, that he would raise and show at the fair. We all loved the state fair. I don't know if he talked to you about that, but that was the big thing, going to the state fair. He did earn extra money after school working at the White Tower. And I will tell you, those hamburgers that he made and those pancakes were the best ever. And I would love when he would make them for me on the cook stove at home. You would know because there wasn't electricity, my grandmother had a cook stove. My mom, who suffered from Alzheimer's in her later years, would, in her sundowners time, talk about the past. And one of the things that she would often say is, Cookie, Cookie, where are you? That was what she called my Uncle Henry. I found out that he got in a lot of trouble. My mom had to leave and go to work and never finished high school to help support the family. And she would bring home treats and little things for the family members. Well, when she went to get them, they were gone because Cookie had gone and eaten all of the candy. She also talked about how he and Richard, she was very, very mad at them because they had gotten into her personal things and they were using her bras as a slingshot. After school, he became a Marine. He would send us little gifts and write long letters. And when he came home on leave, I got to polish his shoes. They had to be spick and span, and he inspected them for approval before he would wear them again. Enter Aunt Sheila, who stole his heart, and eventually off they went to California. I must say though, just so that you know about all of the racing and everything, family love, because after the wedding, the whole Kokosenski family went to Fonda to see the races that night. He installed a bathroom for his mom, which was a wonderful thing, something that she never had. And we had an outhouse, and he did grow up using Sears catalog. As I said, he loved my dad, and he would always call when he was on his road trips. An hour and a half. My dad would talk, he'd give the phone to my mother, and my mother would love those calls. And he would send gifts, all kinds of gifts, socks. And the socks is very important because as a kid, even for myself as a granddaughter, my grandmother gave everybody socks at Christmas. So that's where his love of socks came from. But he would send hats, boxes of hats to my father. My husband still goes into the box when he needs a new hat. So today, in honor of my Uncle Henry J., I want you to know, Aunt Sheila, my dear cousins, he loved each of you dearly and always told me of your accomplishments and how grateful and proud he was to have you for his family. To the grandchildren, as I said before, your accomplishments are well noted in the Whitesboro Alumni newsletter, but he would always share everything that he did. Whenever we would have a phone conversation, I would learn about everything that was going on. To my dear uncle, please give my mom and dad a hug, and Bachi and Jaji. I hope you win the family card game and don't get into too much brawling. That was a gift. Have a polka with my mom. I will miss our phone calls, your political advice, and your stock suggestions. Sorry I didn't have the money to invest. And I'm sorry we never made it to Poland. God bless you.
Thank you everyone for coming today. Coco, I mean, honestly, like I could talk to anyone. I mean, we'd just stay at Grandpa Bowles and Coco's house, and there'd be a person walking down the street, and he'd be like, a lot easier walking downhill, huh? Every single time. One of the things that Coco, his freaking, I remember when I was younger, he was 70, just like lifting like 50-pound tires. I'm like, how the heck is this guy doing that? You know, like, jeez. And he definitely was a very hard worker. I could definitely see it in my mom, especially. My mom, no days off, ever. It'll be 5 a.m. I'm like, where are you going? She's like, work. I'm like, didn't you just go off a couple hours ago? But Coco taught me a lot of things. He'd always try and set you up. He'd try and find a Polish girl for you. Find a nice Polish girl. He'd always call me Kokosenski. And just some of the better memories were when we were at El Torito. I want to say it was me, cousin Chris, and I want to say Justin or Michael or Jason. One of you guys were there. And he's like, a 35-year-old Hispanic waitress. She was a real sweet girl, beautiful voice. She took our order, blah blah blah, drinks, everything, and then she walked away, and then Coco said, "Man, she's a hottie." Trying to set me up with her. And then what Coco doesn't realize is the cash register is right here, and she can listen to everything. Without knowing it. No, it's funny. Coco loved everyone in the family. He had a lot of grandchildren, nieces, nephews, everything for him to remember. I remember one Thanksgiving, it was me and my sisters. He goes, I just want to, we're doing our thanks. I want to thank Kara for being here, Cher, her name is Shore. And then my middle sister, Camber, what do you call it? Whatever her name is. So we call Camber, what do you call it for the next 10 years? Coco definitely had a way of greeting you. He would always say how I mean, that was my fondest memory. You would always have to make sure this phone wasn't on speakerphone, especially when Coco was on it, because you could probably hear how loud he was talking in the phone whenever he talked to my mom. Tara and Terry and Sarah touched on his love for stray animals earlier, and it'd be like, it seemed every time I went over, different times, there was a different cat. And like, you wouldn't know where it was, and I'd be like, oh, is that a new cat? You couldn't keep up with any of the names. The cat would like go away or be outside, he'd be like, meow, 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 come on, meow. It seemed like he always wanted the cats in, but when the cats were in, he'd always be like, go catch me a mouse, you're not going to get any fancy fees. Coco taught me a lot of things. One of the things he taught me was shapes. So it was me and my sister Kara, we were about, I want to say 14, 12, and Justin. And so we're still pretty young, and Coco's like, oh, like, you guys want to come over for the weekend for work, as usual. We're like, yeah, sure. And then he's like, okay, paint the outside of my house. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever I painted a picture of it. Maybe once in like 3rd grade. So I was like, okay, I guess we'll give this a try. So we had those big, 5-gallon buckets of paint from Bio's or Home Depot, one of them. And he's like, okay, go mix these paint. And I'm like, okay. So take the bucket off, pouring it out, and then he's like, you gotta pour it from the corner. And I'm like, pour it from the corner? He's like, yeah, you gotta pour it in the corner. And then he's like still yelling at me, and I'm like still pouring because I don't understand what he's saying. And he's like, no. He's like, you gotta pour it out of the corner of the bucket. And I just kind of go, it's a circle, Coco, you can't pour it out of the corner. So needless to say, that's how I failed geometry in my freshman year. Another funny one was, I want to say it was a home video of one of the uncles, not going to mention his name, but it was hanged for the sinking story. So I don't know what it was, but Hank was on the TV on his home video, and then Coco goes, wow, Hank, you look like you put on some pounds, you know? And then someone, I don't know who it was, I want to say it was Diz or another one, they're like, yeah, a camera adds about 10 pounds. And then Coco replies, well, how many cameras were on you? But yeah, I mean, just take away, Coco, again, is just a hard worker. He's the original Coco. Usually my mom's employees and people that she worked with, she's called Coco, so that's what I'm used to. But yeah, I don't know, honestly, how I raised so many kids. I think that's where my mom gets it, because my mom, she was 30, raised 4 kids. So I'm almost like, I'm 25, so I gotta start getting some kids, you know, or something. Running out of time. But yeah, I could just talk to anyone. I don't think I can speak for everyone when I think that if you went over to this house, it wasn't like an eventful moment or anything. It was just overwhelming, is how you guys would say it. It's definitely a little questionable sometimes with the racism. I think whenever there was a Hispanic person, he'd give them a name. It was usually like Carlita or something. But yeah, he's definitely gonna be missed. I know everyone loves him. His kids, grandchildren, everyone. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Kokosenski, son of Rachel. And I remember when I came over to their house one day, I was about 4 or 5, and I brought one of my toys, and he said he was going to steal it. And I started hiding it, and we left, and every time whenever he came over, I just hit it like crazy. And I just was scared that he was going to steal it. I had a lot of memories with him. Wish I could have spent more time with him. I wanted to leave so early. And that's it.
A very good pro skater, although I was a cheerleader in 1980. But I just want to say, Nick was beautiful. We were all in my dad's hospital bed, and we're all around my dad, and everyone's laughing, crying, just such a great few days. Priceless moments I'll treasure forever. And my mom was just brokenhearted. I mean, just broken up, over my dad. And we're all crying and just so sad. And then Nick comes out of nowhere, just like literally out of nowhere. My mom's going, what am I going to do without him? How am I going to live without him? And Nick was over there, Grandma, he's always going to live in your heart. He's always going to be there for you. I just thought that was really sweet.
I'll bring the mic to you, Greg.
Good afternoon. To whoever doesn't know me, but I am Diana Hernandez. I'm the owner of Silver Dollar Pancake House. I didn't prepare nothing because I remember Coco so well. I was 15 years old. He wanted me to get together with Robert. Well, he got us together, 33 years now. but he also raised me. He raised my husband. He raised my kids. And I can't remember anything one time he'd ever come in that he would not inspire you to be happy, to bring out the best of all of us, and not just me. My employees that could make it, they're here, and he touched everybody. But I want to say, you're all family. I love the stories. But when Coco was with us, we had our own family. We had our own stories. And with his wife, and then they would always come in. And there wasn't one person, like you said, that he would talk to. He'd be talking to anybody and everybody. And I did like that when he came up. He did say I was a hot waitress and screw that. I know I was his number one, but he'd been with us so long, over 45 years. I hate to say too, he knew Doris, that she was a waitress there. She just passed yesterday. And I know he loved her because he remembered her. And I'll tell you only one story I remember. Is when he and Roy Tolton and Doris were there in our restaurant, and all of a sudden a truck came crashing through the windows. And barely missed him, barely missed the other customer, but he did give me a picture and I have it. And he goes, Diana, we almost lost our life then. So in that time, we put, a little bit more shelter on our restaurant. But he was so interested in the truck that crashed through us, that was, 65 truck. It was like, oh, but wait a minute, but I don't know what to say other than he was our family. He was family to us, to everybody in our restaurant. My husband, we wanted to have a memorial at our restaurant, but I don't think my husband could take it. And I'm so sorry about that because I know Coco would have loved it, and we would have loved it too. But that's why my husband's not here, because he knows Coco since he was 13. It was a father, mother, family to him. And we've always been a family to him. May not be the same stories we know of your guys, which is great. But we had such a good time, and he always take time for one of my employees. If they wanted to talk, they would sit down and talk hours with them. But I just remember him raising me and taking care of my kids. And this was a really, really tough one. I want to tell you guys how deeply honored we were to have him in our family. He was a dad, a grandpa, a friend to all of us. Even though we were just a restaurant, he was our family. And I want all of you to know how difficult and how hard this is for all of us also. But we're here, we're strong. And I know Coco right now is saying, Diana, just shut up and get my heart broken away. So I just wanted to go quick and just let you know, we are still here. We still want you there. We may not recognize you, but just say Coco. And that's good for us. Thank you.
And Dan and all of us, my brother, all went to school together. We've been in the family since when we were all young. Now all these stories, including the hot tub stories. There's one story that wasn't brought up, and that's when he was planting his tomato plants, and Eric was there, and he said, "Hey, Coco, you got these upside down. You are kosher, aren't you?" And the plants can grow, right? You know. And so anyway, but we've been to all of this family get-togethers through the years, and Christmases, and Coco always kept me on the phone. When are you coming up? You come over and see us. And I just saw him in January. And all these stories, and I'll never forget them all. Thanks.
This is probably pretty hard for me. I'm Mark. I'm married to Terry we've known each other probably 32 years. Maybe I'm wrong, might not be. But I just remember driving out to Corona and not wanting to drive home, and I would sleep on the couch, and he would get up at God knows what time to go to work, pack his like 7 or 8 coffee thermoses that he would take, and he would talk to me, and I was trying to sleep on the couch, and he would just talk, and then he would be gone. I'd be like, wow, where did he go? And then every single time, that's one of the a good memory. And he always wanted to know how your job was. He wouldn't ask you how you were. Well, if you put a couple pounds on him, yeah, he'd hit you up. But he always wanted to know how your job was. It wasn't, hey, how you doing? It was like, hey, so how's your job going? And you're like, good. So the work ethic is definitely passed down to this whole family, and I picked up on it and employ that in our lives and with our children, and I'm just grateful to be part of the family. Thank you.
Wrap up now. We have a time now for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren to come up. Terry's talking to you. Oh, yeah. Coco's favorite singer was Gia, and that's his son-in-law's sister. So she's going to come up, and then we'll have all the grandchildren come up. I've got some words here for anybody who doesn't know them.
Apparently all
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
beautiful man that has made an impact on all of our lives and many others. And we thank you for this time that we could be together. And just ask for your grace to be with the family as we adjust to him having left us. And pray for everyone here that we could take a little bit of his greatness and live our lives in the same way. We just pray this in Jesus' name.